Hi, my name is Winsley, and welcome to my video on why Mighty Meek is amazing in the Wolf update for Age of Wonders 4. As you can see here, Mighty Meek is a unit enchantment that you can get from the Tome of the Beacon. The fact that you get Faithful on your units and the fact that you get extra spirit damage it is relatively unchanged, but the fact that those effects are increased for non-repeating attacks does mean that the spirit damage that you get is no longer +1 for each of the unit tiers against the enemy. It will be +2 against tier 1 units, +4 against tier 2 units, +6 against tier 3 units. And what's really interesting is you actually get +10 spirit damage against heroes. And that is a massive amount of damage for tier 1 units to be able to deal against heroes. I think that makes it so that tier 1 units are actually more viable than they were before they were in the Wolf update. You just need to be using these non-repeating attacks. Things like a skirmisher's single action attack will be a great use of the extra damage you get from Mighty Meek. The effects are increased from non-repeating attacks also makes it so that Zeal is better. If we take a second to look at the Tome of Zeal, it basically will give this tag to your units extra spirit damage. It doesn't say right here how much it is, but if I take a second to look at this army, he's actually got +6 from just the Zeal alone. And if I look at one of my other armies that has Mighty Meek, you can see that Mighty Meek doesn't actually give any spirit damage at this stage of the map. You don't see it on the units, but this guy's getting basically +4 from Zeal, and then from there it's being increased by 20% from the spawnkin and another 30% from this metal. But yeah, let's see. Legion of Zeal gives you basically +2 spirit damage that gets doubled to +4, and this 6 damage that we're dealing can get doubled again if the unit is condemned, which will be easier to inflict on attacks that are single action and have the ability to apply condemned. So I think if you have like Tome of Inquisition, you can combine that with your skirmisher units to get access to more ways to inflict condemn. I think there's this Inquisitor's Mark, which yeah makes it so that you can inflict condemn, and then you just combine that with all the other things that can apply status effects to maybe increase your damage, and you're going to be dealing a lot of damage with all of your units, but your tier ones are actually going to be relatively competitive because of this. I prepared this combat so that we can actually look at how the Mighty Meek tag works in practice. As we talked about earlier, this guy's getting 6 spirit damage from the Zeal, and it has 26 regular damage. When I try to target a tier 1 unit, that turns into 23 regular damage, 8 spirit from one stack of Mighty Meek. If I try to target this tier 3, I'm actually doing more damage against this unit because they have relatively similar defenses. This guy has 3 resistance, this one has 2. So when it comes to rounding, it doesn't really change the damage output on that spirit damage at all. And when I look at this hero, you can see I'm doing a lot of damage, almost at more spirit damage than my regular physical damage, which is almost like saying I'm dealing 28 spirit damage. But that's really coming from the fact that this guy has about equal parts resistance and defense, as a little bit more defense than it does resistance. But if I were to put him into defense mode, you'll see that my damage output drops quite a bit, but still to a point where I'm actually able to get through quite a decent amount of damage on a tier 1 unit. One neat thing the Arbalest has access to is if the enemy does go into defensive mode, you can use another Arbalest to try and knock him out of defensive mode, and then you will be able to deal more damage. As you can see there, now he's knocked out of defensive mode, and I can either target him with this to deal a slightly more damage, or I can target him with this to deal a little bit less physical damage, but still quite a bit of spiritual damage. And if you're using this Arbalest build, you should have access to Bastions and Steel Shapers as well, who will be able to bolster defense on your Arbalest in an AoE like this, and then you can use the Steel Shapers to give them a bunch of extra damage. We'll go in here and we'll give this front one extra bolstered defense, and then this will give them a bunch of strengthened. But There's also the fact that you can get strengthened through things like I think it was Fury of the Horde gives tier 1 units strengthened, so that would be once again another way to give your Arbalists even more damage. So if we look at this guy now, he's dealing like a lot more damage, just a lot more damage to this hero, and really if you're dealing 50 damage to a hero, then you're only going to need 2 or 3 Arbalists to actually hit their attacks against this unit to take him out of the fight, which is pretty massive. There aren't a lot of tier 1 units that can deal that much damage, and a lot of them require getting up in the face of the enemy. Like if we look at this guy, he's doing a lot of damage, but he has a repeating melee strike, no range attack, which means he's probably going to take damage before he can get into position, and that's just generally a lot riskier. Of course, this is a lot of damage. That's like almost 60 damage right there, and it requires a lot less setup in terms of like putting strengthened on this unit. I believe another way to get more out of Mighty Meek is to use things like Blight Blades to get 20% extra damage against poisoned units, and Frost Blades to get 20% more damage against things that are either frozen or slowed. It is a lot easier to apply frozen to an enemy using things like that Ice Coffin. Right now I'm doing 12, 12, 12 damage, so let's see what happens when I put Ice Coffin on here. And as you can see here, my damage has gone up a little bit. Now with the way rounding and resistances was working in that last attack, it looked like only 2 damage channels were getting the boost from Frostblades. I just wanted to prove here that basically the 219966 is going to turn into more damage against this unit after I apply the thing that lets me get the Frostblade benefit. So right now he's frozen, which means when I go into attack him, all these numbers are bigger. It's 33, 15, 15, 12, 9. Now that we've gone over a couple in combat examples of why Mighty Meek is so good, I want to talk about the units that I specifically like putting Mighty Meek on. So I'm a pretty big fan of the Arbalest, as you saw. It does a lot of damage, but I also like these skirmishers who have single action attacks. I think all skirmishers should have something like the poison needle or the freezing burst or the venom spit, and a lot of these actually apply debuffs, so it can really feed into your ability to do extra damage through those blade attacks once your skirmishers get into position, because these guys have not only a nice range attack, but also a nice melee attack. And this darter is a pretty good unit to put Mighty Meek on because it has that single action thing that lets it get away from the enemy, but it doesn't have the melee strike that takes advantage of the like poison blades or the frost blades interaction. Now, if you do take the Tome of Evolution to get access to Slithers, you can, of course, try and summon in some Wyvern Fledglings, which do evolve into some pretty good units and will do a lot of damage to your enemies once they close the distance. But I feel like, in general, I prefer having these tier 1 Slithers over the Wyvern because they can engage from a safer distance, apply stats effects from that safer distance, and I'm also a pretty big fan of what they evolve into. I really do like the Slithers and the fact that they keep the slip away. Now, if you do take Tome of Evolution, you're probably going to want to focus on skirmishers that evolve. Like this guy evolves and this guy evolves, so you could get a combination of these three or maybe just one of them, and just have those guys slip away to keep them in the fight longer. If you're playing the Arbalest build, or if you're focusing on the darters, then you will be able to take effect of that, take advantage of that effect. There are some other nice tomes that make your animals better. So if you wanted to, you could try a build like what I have on this nation. I think I did take an extra tier 1 tome to try and illustrate basically that, yeah, you could, if you wanted to, get the skirmisher for Tome of Roots to evolve, or to take advantage of the Tome of Evolution thing that gives them slip away. But realistically, I think you could just get away with this tome and this tome as your tier 1 tomes. Frostblades, Frost Arrow is really good just to get some extra damage on your units. And then in tier 2, you're going to want the Tome of Beacon for some Mighty Meek. And the Inquisition, as you can see, I really do like the effect from Inquisitor's Mark, and being able to apply that to a lot of skirmishers that has slip away, I think will really just kind of troll the enemy a lot. make it hard for them to take care of your actions, and then your actions, even on units that have very low health, they have a very good chance of applying status effects. So that's pretty good synergy. If you wanted to, you could take like Tome of Vigor to make your animal units, or excuse me, to make your elephants single model units. So one interesting thing that you can do is you can take these arbalists on their mounts and make them a single model entity using super growth. Wait, this is the one with Spawnkin. Okay, I just had to remind myself the way Spawnkin and the super growth work. The super growth will make things like your spiritualist a single model entity, whereas Spawnkin will make them smaller, and you'll have like 3 units or 3 models in there that can reduce the damage output. Even though you only see one here, it does work a little bit differently than super growth, and with the way when figures die, you have damage disappear. So that could be one way to keep your arbalists dealing full damage longer. But I don't think you can put slip away on them because they're not evolution. You can't give them keeper's mark because I don't think that goes on ranged units. While you can use super growth with Arbalest, something tells me that Spawnkin being something that only applies to your racial units would make it probably the better choice for these tier 1 single action units like the Arbalister, or if you wanted to use like the Dark Warrior from the Dark culture, or the Harrier from the Reaver culture, or the Sunderer from the Barbarian culture, then I think, yeah, Spawnkin would make the most sense. But if you're going for something like the evolutions units, which are animals and they do benefit from some of the things in the same tome, like if we go back here, we'll see that the super growth was from the nature tome that gives you the same thing as extra damage on your animal units. So like our Slithers are going to deal 20% extra damage, have some more health, have decreased numbers in formation. That's kind of like, the super growth thing. And then, uh, you can get super growth on all of your other units, like the ones that have retaliation would be probably a good way to take advantage of super growth. I almost forgot to mention that one of the nice things about this tome is you get a nice hero skill that can apply to your slithers or to your cavalry units. Being able to resist mind control across all those units is really big because mind control can be really annoying. Taking your own actions and basically giving them to the enemy is massive. It can really swing a fight. But there's also this other one that we kind of breezed past. We didn't talk about how the shepherd can make it so that all of your units that have the evolve tag get extra defense and extra resistance. I just think that's a lot of synergy with Mighty Meek and the Tome of Evolution, which is a big part why I think either the Slither Hatchling or the Arbalest is the best unit to put Mighty Meek on. There are other tier 1 units that we haven't talked about, like the Piglet, I think it is called. The Gortus Piglet has a single action attack. It's actually very similar to the Dark Warriors charge attack from the Dark culture. And then there are, like we talked about earlier, the Darter from the Primal culture, the Sunder from the uh, Barbarian culture. If we wanted to look that up, the Sunder has a single action attack, a javelin that it can throw. It's pretty good damage too. But one thing we haven't talked about is how you could try putting Mighty Meek on some units like the Arcanist, who just does a lot of damage. The Mystic's Arcanist is kind of known for being a bit of a glass cannon. It has no defense, no resistance, but it does a lot of damage. Specifically, if you can apply Star Blades before they start attacking the enemy, because that's extra fire, lightning, or frost damage for a few turns. But there's also things like the Storm Spirit. I think the Storm Spirit we didn't really focus in on, but that's one option, kind of like the Snow Spirit that has a single action attack. If I go in here, I think we can find the Storm Spirit and under the Astral Tome. It was in the fight, but yeah, it's just another single action charging unit. One neat thing I noticed about the Houndmaster, which is from I think it's the Chaos Tome. The Houndmaster comes from this one, right? Yeah, he spawns in a tier 1 unit, but that tier 1 unit doesn't have Mighty Meek, but just having more units on the field allows you to take out the enemy faster and keep things away from your Arbalists or things that might have a single action attack that could be more vulnerable. Generally, a lot of the skirmishers are like that. Oh, and we don't want to forget the caustic worm. That's another wildlife animal that you could run into or you could try and use with the single action attack to get the most out of Mighty Meek. There are a few aspects of the Arbalest build which I prepared that we haven't taken a look at, like how the Tome of the Winds will give the Arbalests the ability to shoot targets that are further away, but if things are already at long range, then it's going to be pretty hard to hit them, and if you don't have ways to boost your accuracy through things like, I don't know, marked, or there is a trait that you can pick at the beginning of the game to make it so that your shots land more often, then secret arrows can be very good value. But if you're just missing those shots because you're shooting things with too low of accuracy because they're too far away, then that's not very good value. The nice thing about this tome on top of Seeker's arrows is that you have abducting cyclone. So if you wanted to, you can try and abduct a hero closer to your Arbalests who can then run really far forward and take a single action attack to try and kill the hero that the enemy thought was safe, but actually because you were able to abduct them, they were not safe. They were in the range of engagement of your units. There are also some other things in here, like if you give them the draconian transformation, they can do more damage if they take a little bit of damage but don't die. That just basically means that the enemy will have to try and take out the Arbalists in 1 or 2 turns once they start engaging with them. Just relying on damage over time probably won't be as good as just removing them from the fight. And there is the fact that the Pandemonium will give us extra damage against things that have negative status effects, which generally speaking this build does a lot of, and it will do more of that type of thing if you can get some Chaos Eaters or some Havoc magic on a couple battle mages or support units. As I mentioned earlier in the video, you can use a steel shaper to make it so that your units with Mighty Meek will deal more damage, but there are other ways to get that strengthened. You don't have to use the Industrious Culture. One neat way to do it is through the Barbarian faction. They have this nice unit that has a single action attack that you can put Mighty Magic on, but they also have the Shaman who can strengthen things in an AoE. So the Steel Shaper will be better at strengthening a single unit, whereas the Shaman will be better at strengthening a group. And if you wanted to do something like this through a Tome unit, you can take Tome of Revelry, the Chaos Tome, to get access to Scalds. Scalds have the ability to give 2 strengthened to units in an AoE. So that's a lot of strengthened and fortune, which can make your units deal a lot more damage. The last thing we're going to look at here is how you can build your faction at the beginning of the game to best take advantage of Mighty Meek. If we look at my traits, you can see they're actually the same on the two factions. I took elephant mounts and quick reflexes to make it so that enemies would have to come to me in order to deal with my units. They're either going to have to deal with me in melee range or take some low accuracy ranged attacks, which should allow my Arbalists to be generally a little bit more safe behind my own units. And then the elephant mounts is just pretty good because it gives them extra HP and mobility, so they can get around the field a lot more and stay alive a lot longer. Industrious, we've talked about Industrious as a pretty good pick, but we haven't talked about Fable Hunters and Prolific Swarmers. I really like Prolific Swarmers specifically with this build because it makes the tier 1 units viable for a lot longer. And I know a lot of people weren't taking this pick because they felt like it focused just too much on tier 1 units. But if you're doing the Arbalists like Spawnkin and Prolific Swarmers, I think you have very good potential to build up those powerful armies quickly, and then they'll actually stay relatively competitive a lot longer because of the way Mighty Magic allows you to just deal more damage to not only tier 3s, but tier 4s, tier 5s, and the heroes. Like those heroes take a lot of extra damage from the Mighty Meek. But yeah, the city is going to grow faster, the units are going to cost less, and the fact that you're going to be able to get extra ranks from this and Fabled Hunters means the Arbalists start at least rank 2, and you're going to be able to get more benefits from clearing things. I think there was another ability out there to increase the ranks on either my ranged units or my skirmisher units other than these two, but I feel like these two are just slightly better in terms of combination. Now, when we look here, we can look at ritual. We can see how I took ritual cannibals and mana channelers with the primal stormcrow, and that's because I figured this build would be leaning more in the tome of evolution, but not just Slithers. I figured I would be building some magic origin units like the Frost Elementals, or maybe I think a Wyvern counts as a magic origin unit because you summon it. But there's other neat things that you get later on as T3 units that you can summon in. This will benefit them. That combined with the ritual cannibals means that the units that are racial will be able to eat corpses, which will keep them in the fight a little bit longer. This trait also has the benefit that it will deny the corpses from necromancers who may want to resurrect those units. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I had for you in this video. If you have any thoughts you wanted to share with people, please feel free to leave some comments below. I'll see you around. Have a good one.